Welcome to the Village Well podcast, brought to you by Village Well Books and Coffee in downtown Culver City. Welcome back to the Village Well podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Casper, and I'm joined for this introduction with our producer, Josh Stretton Carlson.
How's it going, Jen?
It's going great. It's been a crazy busy weekend in the shop.
Absolutely.
As it always is now. It feels so great to walk around and see the place buzzing so hard.
I feel like a lot of people discovered us in the Christmas and Hanukkah season. And since the new year, it's just been like every weekend is super packed. So
right. It's great.
Yeah.
I hope it sustains at this level because it feels so good.
Totally.
Yeah, we've got lots of good feelings in the shop. Someone got engaged here this week.
It was so cute.
It was so cute. It was they planned it out. The guy called one of our event planners and said, "My wife and I, or my girlfriend and I, this is a really special place to us. I would love to stage an engagement in the sci-fi fantasy aisle of the shop." And
they gave us he was so he had the vision locked down.
Yeah.
He gave us like specific songs he wanted to have playing.
Do you remember any of the songs?
One was Defying Gravity, of course.
Oh yes, I heard that.
And they had some connection with Wicked and I think earlier in their relationship, and it was very well done.
It was so sweet. And he dropped off twinkle lights that we installed, and he wrote out all these little shelf talker cards with all these all of his words about what she meant to him. It was so sweet. And I was in my office, so I just heard people screaming when it was done. Yay, they did it.
Yeah. She said yes.
She said yes, yes. So we're here in the studio. We've got our new art exhibit up, Piece by Piece. It's a nonprofit I worked with for a long time in my years before I did Village Well. I was on their board of directors. And it's an organization that works in Skid Row and South LA and with other parts of Los Angeles with people who have experienced homelessness or are at risk of experiencing homelessness, teaches them mosaic art, gives them a space to do it, and creates this incredibly beautiful art while also providing them with a program. It's not art therapy, but it's therapeutic, meditative, soothing type practice, and also gives the artists a way to earn money when they sell their art or when they work on commissions, like the one across our cafe mural. And so I'm so excited to have this studio where we can show art and to be showing piece by piece art right now. And next week we'll be interviewing them for our podcasts.
Yeah.
So I'm excited for this week's episode too. We interviewed Kim Dower, an amazing local poet. I did that interview with Nima Belton, one of our booksellers and one of our podcast co-hosts. And we had a great conversation about her new book called What She Wants. It's a collection of poetry about the concept of limerence, which was a word that was new to me. It's some version of obsessive, unrequited love. And, is something that Kim has just thought a lot about in her life and decided finally to pull together a collection of poems about it. She talked about other things she's done in her life as a poet, the literary scene that she's observed both as a creator of poetry and as a promoter of other authors' work in New York and Los Angeles.
And she did a couple of readings, which I found really moving. And, I think something that's fun with an audio medium, like poetry just really lends itself, these bite-sized pieces that we can drop into the show and give the audience a taste of what's in store in the book. And I thought it was really creative the way, Limerence, I guess, has these 4 stages, and you'll have to listen more to find out what they are. But she kind of structured the book around these 4 stages, and so the whole thing has this kind of meta-narrative as you move through the individual poems. So I found it really interesting.
Yeah. It was great. And it was fun to do with Nima. I felt like I could relate to Kim just kind of on being in a similar stage of life to her and maybe experienced more limerence and being able to relate to the content of the poetry. Nima, being a much younger person than both Kim or me, I think she what she brought to it was just a better appreciation of poetry because she really enjoys poetry, and I have too much ADD and don't.
You and me both.
I don't appreciate poetry as much as I wish I did, but Nima loves it, and so she was great to do another interview with.
Totally.
So,
well, please enjoy.
So welcome, Kim. It's so lovely to have you here.
Thank you.
This isn't your first time here. You've been here to read twice, most recently for the book that we're talking about today, What She Wants.
Yes, you have a beautiful bookstore, by the way, and anyone far and wide, you should make the trip to Los Angeles just to see it. No, there's such a spirit here, and it's so lively, and
Thank you.
everyone's just seems happy and safe to be here. So it's really nice.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting
I appreciate that. Thank you. So we like to start our interviews by asking you to write a shelf talker, one of those cards that you see on the shelf in the bookstore. Just a brief sales pitch for your book. Can you write a shelf talker for What She Wants?
Well, sure. What She Wants is your guide to obsessive love. And, I found a word called limerence. And limerence just defined everything this book is. So it's the state of being infatuated with someone, and it's not necessarily returned. So What She Wants takes you through the 4 stages of limerence: infatuation, crystallization, deterioration, and ecstatic release. And the poems are put in that order. So you can read it individually. You can read the poems as you pick them up, or you can read it straight through for a story until you get to the ecstatic release part. Oh. So all of us who have been infatuated with someone or other, this will remind you of those feelings.
Can relate to that. Yeah.
Yes.
If I was writing a shelf talker, I'd also try to add in the words funny and surprising that, like a lot of your poetry. It's very enjoyable to read because it kind of takes you on a ride.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's nice.
So we'll get more into the subject matter of the book, but we wanted to start out also by asking you about yourself.
Yeah, so can you maybe let us know a little bit about your career and your timeline and how you got your start into the literary world?
Sure. Well, like so many of us, we get our start in the literary world when we're like 3 and we're reading Dr. Seuss or A. Milne or whatever. It clicks. When you see young children reading books, they all love them, don't they? And I think it for me, it put me in a world that was away from, like all of us, in another place. So I carried that on through school, through college. But I started writing poetry in my journal, again, like so many of us do, in junior high school and high school. But not until college did it become something real. And I was lucky enough, it was complete luck. I went to Emerson College in the 70s before it had a reputation as a writing school, but it was just starting to be this amazing place with wonderful poets, young poets, before they became famous. And I was lucky enough to study with Thomas Lux, who is no longer with us, but he was a young man then, later was at Sarah Lawrence for 20 years and then Georgia Tech and has many, many books. But he proclaimed everyone in that creative writing class a poet. You are all poets, he said to 17-year-olds who didn't know what we were, and gave us sort of our marching orders. You report what you see in a way that's never been reported before. And I learned so much in those 4 years. And I became a poet. I mean, that was what I was. So I was lucky also to be able to stay there and teach for 2 years. So I taught Introduction to Creative Writing. I was young. All my students were young. It was just fun. But I wanted to move to LA. Boston was cold and dark at 4 o'clock, and it wasn't very welcoming to women poets. I will say that. This was in the 70s, and it was a very male-dominated field. And it was depressing, to be honest. I wanted something else. So I moved to sunny Los Angeles and stopped writing for a while and did other things. I started a business, which I still have to this day. And I got married, had a child. My life took different directions. Poetry was always there, like a missing link. There was something missing. And I would write little notes. I'd put them in pockets. I had journals. It was definitely there, but in the background. And I continued to read poetry because it always gave me solace and pleasure and enjoyment. And if you have 5 minutes, you can read a poem and it can change your life in that 5 minutes.
Absolutely.
So that's the miracle of poetry and the joy that it brings. And I had such a solid education those early years that I was still there, ready. And I have an incredible poetry library that's been built for 50 years. And when my son went to college, it's the story you've heard a million times, the empty nest, no more lunches to pack, no more people to worry about, keys to listen to in the door coming home. And even though I had my business, I had this room. I had this room suddenly. And a few events happened that made me think the only way to deal with this is to write a poem about it. And it just started coming, and honestly, it started flowing and flowing and flowing in the middle of the night, 2-3 poems a day. And I got in touch with Tom Lux, who is still at Sarah Lawrence. And I said, hey, I started writing again after like 20 years, and I have no idea if these are any good or what. And he's very funny. He was a very funny person. And he said, well, the warranty has expired.
On your college education.
Yeah, it's like the warranty has expired. But send me 10 poems. So I did. And he said, Kimmy, call me Kimmy, or Fruitcake. He goes, Fruitcake, you still have the humor, you still have the imagination, you still have the feel, but you've lost some of the technique. And you need to go to some poetry workshops. You need to get back into the form, and you need to remember about line breaks. And I was like, oh my God, yes. And I did. I found a great workshop in Los Angeles run by Terry Wolverton, who you may have heard of. She's a wonderful poet and prose writer. And I started going every Saturday morning for 12 years.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, wow.
Never missed one. I mean, maybe I missed 1 or 2. And I went to the Sarah Lawrence summer program. I went to the Palm Beach Poetry Festival every year. I studied with as many people as I could. I was really fanatical about getting the craft back and learning. So there's a very long answer for you, but that's the story. And then I published my first book with Red Hen in 2010 and have published 6 books since with them every 3 years.
Oh, wow.
So, and now I'm going to go to sleep for a very long, for a very long time. That's my story.
Is it a lot of work? Are you exhausted from it? Is that why you have to go to sleep?
I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
I still do. I have a business called Kim from LA.
Yeah.
And I do publicity for authors, not poets, because I can't do that. I draw the line.
Okay.
And
too
plus,
close to...
It's too close. And also there's no money in poetry.
Okay.
So I'm not going to be taking someone's money to promote a book of poems.
Got it.
And there's a lot lower expectations for poetry to sell. In the poetry world, if you sell 1,000 books, you're a best-selling poet. So, and I also need that space. I have my world of poetry and my poetry friends, but Kim from LA is very separate.
Right. Tell us about your business, because it's also interesting to our listeners who are interested in books and the literary world.
Well, it's a wonderful business. It's called Kim from LA. Basically, when I moved here, I got a job working as a publicist for a publisher. I was in my 20s. My name was Kim Freilich. The company was Jeremy P. Tarcher, Inc. And I used to get on the phone before email and say, hi, it's Kim Freilich from Jeremy P. Tarcher, Inc. in Los Angeles, and be like, hello, hello, hello. So pretty soon I started saying, hi, it's Kim from LA.
Yeah.
And
it's like you turned it into a poem. The only other one didn't roll off the tongue.
It worked. Believe me, when you're calling Philadelphia and you're calling all these cities, in the 80s that had 1 million talk shows and newspapers, it was a very different world out there in terms of media. But after about 3 years of working for him, I wanted to start my own business. It was 3 or 4 years. I felt like I had done some pretty difficult books that people were not that interested in, homeopathic medicine at home. I mean, if I could get someone to interview that author, give me another book. And so I started my own business in our little house in Laurel Canyon. It was hard, you can imagine, but it grew and it grew and it grew. And, during the 90s, I had a lot of clients. Like I did all the West Coast publicity for Simon & Schuster and for Warner Books and for Hyperion. It was a lot of fun years of big, big, big books and no time to write a poem, no time to even think about it. But I did a lot of bestsellers. I did a lot of celebrity books. And I still have the company. It's different now, but I have some wonderful clients and it's fun. The whole media world has changed. So in Los Angeles, when I started, we had 3 newspapers that were all, the LA Times, the LA Daily News, the Herald Examiner. These were all good papers. We had talk shows, live talk shows in a room like this that went all day. KBC Talk Radio, KLOS Talk Radio. There were no podcasts, but there were live radio shows. There were TV shows, Good Morning This, Good Morning That. There was Larry King. There was Charlie Rose. There was, so you could really get some publicity, and they wanted to talk to authors. Now it's different. Now we don't have those things. So you have to be diligent and keep looking for new opportunities, keep looking for new podcasts. But that's what I do. So I do Kim from LA and I write my books and there you have it. So I also do, and I should talk about this, and I love doing it, media training. I hate the term media training. It sounds like, it sounds really weird. I prefer, I guess, coaching. But a lot of people do not know how to talk when they do get on a podcast or a show. I hope I'm a good example of it. But maybe I'm going on too long.
What should they do? What shouldn't they do?
Well, first of all, it's their moment. So they're there to say what they want to say, no matter what the question. That's probably a bad thing to say on a podcast, but...
we just came out of a presidential election where a lot of that happened.
Well, here's the thing. For elections and when you're voting for someone or any medical care, I feel people have a responsibility to tell the truth and to answer a question. Of course, they don't. Politicians don't. But if you're an author, if you've written a novel, you don't have an obligation to say anything that you don't want to say, or a book of poems or whatever. So it's your job to sort of move the interview to where you want it. And some people also get very seduced on these shows. So if they're asked a question that has nothing to do with the book or what they want to talk about, they go down that road and then they get off the show and they say, I didn't say anything I wanted to say. So I help them, first determine what is it that you want to say. Right. I hate the image, but if someone put a gun to your head, and you had 1 minute to talk about your book, what would you say? So we try to learn that. And then what are the 3 things you want people to know? For example, with my book, What She Wants, I want people to know that they will see themselves in these poems, that there are a lot of feelings we go through about love and obsession and remorse and that are difficult to put into words. And sometimes a poem will help you really see yourself and feel. It's not about seeing me, it's about seeing you. And also for all poetry, this is, as I said before, you can read a poem in the morning when you wake up and have it really change the trajectory of your day, give you other things to think about, or read it at lunch. You don't have to commit to 2 weeks of finishing a novel, which is fine too. But poetry, and also people will say, oh, I don't like poetry, or I don't understand poetry. And it's sort of ridiculous because it's like saying, I don't like food. There's food for everyone. You may not like, grapes, but you might like tamales. Right. There's totally so many foods and so many kinds of poems to enjoy that you're losing out by not just opening that door.
Right.
Now, a good poem will be about one thing, and then it will be about the other thing.
Say more.
Yeah.
So if you are enjoying it and it's a narrative poem or it's telling you something that you can identify with, you enjoy it, but then there will be another meaning or another couple of meanings. There are other things.
Can I read a poem here that I laughed at when I read it, but I would like you to tell me what the other meanings are. It's called Obsession. She reads that a squirrel's front teeth never stop growing. She will look into this. She will set the record straight.
Yeah, it's, I love when I laugh at my own poems. That's a sign of true self-love. So I'm glad you picked that poem. It's a teeny little poem. So the book is about obsession. And we're obsessed about all kinds of things. And sometimes when we're in the limerence state of being obsessed, things stick out to us, like, why that? Why that? We're very hyper aware. So the speaker of the poem, who happens to be the writer, me, I did read that a squirrel's teeth never stop growing. And that stuck with me. So, I thought that was hilarious. I see the world in a funny way. So to me, that was perfect. That was a great prompt.
The fact that you were obsessed
Yes.
with this interesting fact.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
And then it was like, I bet that's not true. So I just wrote those lines.
Yeah.
She will set the record straight.
Yeah.
Because that's also, it's funny because people we know say, I'm going to set the record straight.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, please. And so it's absurd, right? To talk about a squirrel's teeth never stopping growing. And I read that at my readings because it's a nice little...
In a book about obsession, this is something you can be obsessed about.
Right. You can be obsessed about anything. And there are people we all know who, and they're so annoying, but they're always like, I'll find out the truth. I'm going to find out. I'm going to get to the bottom of this. I'll set the record straight. So I cracked myself up when I wrote it. It was like, I thought it was very funny. But thank you for liking that poem.
You're welcome.
In talking about all of the meanings and the different layers of poetry, what's your approach when writing? Are you more of a forward writer where you want people to immediately grasp the concept that you want to put forward, or do you want to, always layer and put hidden meanings within your words and things like that?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't have any agenda when I sit down to write a poem. I don't think I want to do this, or I want to layer it, or I want to do that. It's really magical. And I don't mean to sound moronic when I say this or insincere, but there is something magical about writing a poem. It's a leap of faith that what's going to come through you as you write it will be something. So that it's a prompt. It's something that will get me, like the first poem in the book, She'll Do Anything for Food. Well, a woman said that to me on the street with her dog. And I thought, this is so usable. I've got to write this. So I went upstairs to my Kim from LA office, and I'm lucky I don't have anybody. I don't punch a time clock. So I'm just, it's my time. But I wrote, She'll Do Anything for Food. And then you just start writing and writing. You don't know what's going to come out. It's in the editing, in the moving the lines around and taking things out and changing words that's so tedious. But I don't think, what will they get out of this? What will people see in this? But I had years of workshops to help me see how people might see something I didn't want. So like an example, in this writing workshop I took every Saturday, the person sitting next to you would read the poem first that you bring in. And you could listen and you could hear immediately what was wrong in that poem. Either the sound of it, because you have to read the poems aloud. And that's a way to love them more. Instead of just reading it to yourself, read it aloud and you'll hear the music and you'll hear... But so I would hear, oh no, I don't want that. That word doesn't work because he stumbled on it when he read it, or it sounded out of place. Then you read it. And then the people in the group will say what meanings they take from the poem. And that was a mind blower because, somebody could say, well, the speaker obviously is having a problem with her mother. And you can see by this line, and I think, no, I didn't mean that at all. And I would write the notes that everyone said, and then I would take them home and put all the pages across the table, and I'd look. So for a long time, I learned, well, this is going to make people think this. And then I would rewrite or change, and then after a while, I didn't care. If that's what you took from the poem, fine. As long as you get some meaning from a poem and it has some emotional resonance, whatever you think, like the Beatles used to say, like John Lennon would say, I didn't mean this to be about God at all. I had no idea, but people decide what your work means. And I mean, not that I'm John Lennon, don't get me wrong, but I'm just saying that people will put meanings in your work that you had no, but you want it to mean something, so does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Should we talk about limerence?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
So Nima and I had some conversations about limerence.
So I know your book, focuses heavily on the concepts of limerence and obsession. So I wanted to know first, what inspired that choice and how you went about writing from the perspective of someone experiencing it. Because I know that there's a big difference between having a crush and being in a state of limerence. And while we've all had a crush, we may not have all been in that state before. So I'm curious to know, if you've experienced it and, in your experience, how did you decide to tell these stories?
Well, certainly I've experienced it. And I had an interview with someone at the beginning of my little book tour, and she said, oh, yes, I know what you're talking about, limerence. It starts in middle school and it ends when you're dead. And I love that. I said, could I say that quote, New York Times? Anyway, so yes, I've certainly experienced it. For me, a crush is more than a crush. It's going to be limerence. Crush is it's too simple. But as I said at the beginning, when I read that word somewhere, I'd never heard the word before. So I read it in the context of, she was in the spell of limerence or something. And I thought, oh, God, what the heck is that? This is maybe 10 years ago. I'd never heard the word before. It's a beautiful word, Limerence, limerence, not to be confused with limericks.
Right.
Which is
Completely
a
different.
danger for the title of the book. But anyway, I looked it up, and it was a fairly new psychological term of being obsessively infatuated with someone. And the psychological term then went on to have the 4 stages. Now, as a poet, I mean, oh my God, the word infatuation and then, crystallization when it comes together and you think, oh my God, they feel something for me. Or, we've all been in all these states, deterioration. Well, come on. And then ecstatic release is in itself a poetic term almost. It's what happens when you write a poem. You have an ecstatic release. So there's a lot in this book that you could also say is about writing, because when you're writing, you're in a state of limerence. You are infatuated with your words at that moment. And then the crystallization when you really think the poem's coming together, and then the deterioration when you see it's falling apart and you have to move everything and change words. And then you could say it's about writing, but to stick with the idea of the infatuation to a person, I thought this is a great way to format a book of poetry. My previous book is a book called I Wore This Dress Today for You, Mom. And it really follows the story of my mother's dementia. And there's funny poems in it, but it's one idea with many different poems to support that idea. So it's about being a mother, having a mother, losing a mother, and the story of motherhood. And it did well because people responded to what it was as a book, because people do have problems with poetry, as we've discussed. So this was something that you could go through and have a storyline. So I thought, oh, this is I have a lot of poems that were unpublished, some from previous books, but mainly this book is new, that would fit these ideas. So it's not like I sat down and wrote a book of poems to fit them. I had already a lot of poems, because when you write every day or every week, you collect them, and they just sit there like little, very troubled little stars, not knowing what galaxy to connect to, and they want a place to go. They're like, you just left us here to die. So, I have all these folders on my computer that, I don't know what the difference is, like poems in play, poems in progress, poems not published, they're all the same.
I was just wondering, you talk about writing poems and publishing them in books, but do you also share them do you go to readings?
I do. You mean other people's or my own readings?
Oh, yeah, other people's. Like, do you go to like Library Girl or some of the other poetry brothel, the poetry circles that exist in LA?
I do as much as I can. I support my local poets and my friends, and we're very kind and generous as a group. Poets are. So if I can, be
noticed
there,
that when we have open mics or groups of poetry readings, that the poets and their families that come out to watch each other are so supportive of the whole group.
Absolutely. If I can be there, I'll be there. And there are certain things I won't miss, friends and when they have debuts.
Yeah.
So absolutely, it's a wonderful.
But are those opportunities for you to share the poems that you've written? I'm just wondering about the life. You were describing this poem that was like sitting in a folder on your computer, and wondering if it has, if you find other ways to give it life other than publishing it in a book. And then,
well, that's a good question. Not really. I mean, when the poems are published, so with this book, I've been on a book tour, and I put myself on the book tour, but it started in January, and I'm going till the end of April. I'm really pushing it. Yeah. Because I love reading the poems, and I've been, to San Francisco. I'm going to go back. I've been all over LA. I went to Portland. I went to New York City, and I will continue to go places to read the poems, and I really enjoy it. And then, sort of the door is closed, and that it's over, and I think the reason why people do like to go to workshops is because you get to read your poem in front of people and you get feedback. And that's very nurturing and important, and it's fun also. I stopped going years ago. Really, I felt I needed to stop because I kept hearing all their voices and opinions in my head as I was writing, because we were such a close group and it was so many months and years that I needed to be alone with the work, But I am getting to the point where I think it would be really fun to find a group of poets and work together again and read and talk about our work. So it's always fun to read.
And going back to how we talked about some people don't have the best impression of poetry or necessarily love to read it. I know for me, my favorite thing about it is just the exploration of language in such a small amount of time.
Yeah.
I think it's so incredibly interesting to me that the placement of words changes the entire meaning of an entire poem or an entire book, honestly, just by making minuscule changes. So I wondered what your favorite part of specifically poetry is and what you hope people can gain from it or see within it, even if it isn't what they would usually gravitate towards.
Okay, so it's sort of two different questions that are both important. The first part, what you say about the words being so important, the placement of them, poetry, as we know, is the most concise form of language. And in that regard, it is a thrill to create something. William Carlos Williams would say, a good poem is like a fine machine. Every part has to be working and moving properly. And so after the ecstatic release, maybe of getting it on the page, the going in there and tinkering and moving around, that's a joy. It's all encompassing joy to be in that place. And even to sit and think, oh, that word is so wrong, and not be able to come up with a better one or a different one. And it's hurts sometimes, but it's pleasurable to have that challenge. So that is great. And when someone says to me, I love how concise this is, or how you hit each word, or each, that's a huge compliment. I mean, it's nice when someone says, this is so funny and I love your humor. I mean, that's lovely too, but to be told that I was able to perform that task and get the poem as tight as can be. So for me personally, when I read, was the other part of your question, I also admire that, the way the words are put together. But I also, as a reader, I like an enjoyable story. I mean, I gravitate toward narrative poetry. There's all kinds of poetry that I try to get myself to like better, because I don't want to just like one kind, but the poetry that's just about the way it looks on the page or the way it sounds, that's not necessarily my thing. But I try to understand and learn about it. But I like, Billy Collins, for example, he's very narrative. He tells a story. But he also is concise, and every word is there for a reason. And he brings you into the poem. I mean, this is why everybody loves his work. There's a reason why. He's a great poet. He's funny. He brings you in. When I say it means one thing, but it means another thing, there's always another meaning there, when you start reading him. And, you feel like you're part of what's going on. You don't feel left out in the cold like you do with a lot of other poets, or I shouldn't say that, a lot of other poets, but other poems sometimes can leave you feeling something's wrong with you. Why don't I understand that? Well, maybe it's not written in a way that you will ever understand it, but maybe it's just a language poem. And you're just supposed to enjoy the sounds or the surprise of the words together. I try to open my mind up more to other kinds of work. So I admire poetry that speaks to me, that brings me in, but that is also surprising. Wow, I never saw that coming. That is what you want in your poem. I never saw that coming.
Do you want to read something?
Sure. I'll read the first poem in the book.
Okay, good.
How's that? So
yeah,
it sort of sets the stage, because it is about obsession and love. And as I mentioned, she'll do anything for food. I went downstairs to take a walk in the middle of the day, and a woman was walking her dog, and this comes from that moment. So many of my poems, the title is the first line. So, she'll do anything for food, the dog walker tells me. She speaks quietly, not wanting to insult her heavy-boned, one blue, one brown-eyed beast tugging at her leash. We did a doggy ancestor test, she confides, discovered she's part wolf, part miniature poodle. Must be the poodle part, makes her so ravenous. Small creatures are ruthless feeders. Think of enraptured rats gnawing their way through orange trees, babies nursing, sucking so fiercely they can burst a nipple. Think of your heart, size of a throbbing fist, the part of you that will do anything for love. So, what I love about other people's work, and what I love when I'm writing, is when it takes you to a place you didn't know you were going. So seeing this woman and the dog, and then you come upstairs and you start to write, I didn't know where I was going with that. And when you hit it at the end, you know that's it. You hit it. And when you don't hit it, you know you didn't hit it.
Yeah.
So
when you get to the end and then the last word is love, and the context of the book, it's called What She Wants. There's a woman in kind of a position of longing, looking out a window on the cover. You're reading something about desire, romantic desire probably. And then, but immediately you get into that poem and you're like, oh, we're talking about a dog. She'll do anything for food. And then when you close it with what you'll do for love, it does really hit you and set you up for the book.
Yeah, good. Thank you. I thought, another favorite part for me of the book, of ordering the book. Mm-hmm. Where do you place which poem? Mm-hmm. And again, like Tom Lux, so much of what I know or do is based on things he told me. But he said in the book, you've got to make your first 5 poems your strongest, or some of your strongest, and the last one. Because people will look through the first few poems and they'll go to the last poem.
one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a favorite poem in this book?
I didn't, but it's become favorite because of people's reaction to it. I wrote a poem called The Ode to the Phone Booths in New York. And people love this poem, but particularly New Yorkers. I just read in New York last week, and it was a great group of people. And it was particularly great because I didn't know a lot of them. They were, it was an event, and they were there, and they just went crazy for this poem.
Yeah. Should we have you read it?
All right. So, I'll just open by saying, of course, poets write odes. When someone dies, you write an ode. So I grew up in New York City, and I read, a few years ago that they were taking away all the phone booths in New York. And I thought, this cannot be. So I wrote an ode to the phone booths in New York City. We'd cram ourselves in after school. One more, just one more. Okay, you. Our shoulders crushed, groping like idiots, cheeks smashed against the glass. One of us with a finger in the accordion door. Pour our dimes into the slot, call our mothers to say Donna's for dinner or Joey's to study. Then off we'd go to Central Park. Sometimes it was just me and Melissa. Thunderstorms, humidity creeping into the booth. She'd sit on the seat, heavy phone book on a wire, swaying between us, while I made collect calls with a fake credit card to random people. The excitement killing us. Senior year, it'd be me alone, excusing myself from my parents' dinner table, running a brush through my hair, elevator down, making the call to my boyfriend, filthy receiver tight in my hand, mouthpiece caked with someone else's spit, smelling like the inside of someone else's mouth. I'd hang up if his mother or sister answered. They couldn't know we were about to meet, walk into the dark opening of the park, find our spot below the American elms that lined the river, my heart pounding, fingertips laced with the sweat of strangers.
That's great. So evocative. Also, so new. Like you were saying that people in New York responded to it, and I don't know if it was specifically about the phone booth or about like the descriptions of being in New York City.
Oh, they loved it. I mean, the greatest thing, like they laughed at the right places, and everyone can remember, those phone booths and the big phone book swaying and that little string it hung on. And, there's so many jokes about phone booths, like how many people can you pile into the phone booth? I mean, this is in the 60s. We didn't have that much to do, even though we grew up in New York. It's like, there's a phone booth, and then you walk by and you see if there's any change. And if there's a dime, you can go to Phil's Pizzeria and get a Diet Coke, or, it's like the phone booths were exciting. And, it's interesting, like, I teach a class in different places called Poetry and Memory. And like, you sort of merge things that you remember with things that you make up. Like, sure, it was Melissa, but I was never in the phone booth with her alone, or, or the fake credit card was done in the college dorm. It wasn't done in the phone booth, so you pick different things from different places and you kind of combine them. Everybody thinks that poetry is autobiographical. That's another problem, because it isn't. It can be absolutely, and of course it uses things you remember, but if you write a murder mystery, people don't come up to you at the end of a signing and say, did you really cut up all those bodies and put them in the trunk of your car? So but with a poem, people think, well, it happened to you, I once, in my first book, Air Kissing on Mars, which really, I looked at it recently, and those poems, they were fun. They were good poems. They were a long time ago, but I have a poem called "They Took the Mailbox Away." I guess I'm obsessed with things they're taking away, but they took the mailbox away. On Clinton and Cahuenga, I know because I was about to take a walk, think of things, and I have this poem that moves about this. And then I in the poem, it's once I threw an ice cream cone into the mailbox. And, what was I thinking when a letter arrived to college admissions with sticky butterscotch? And I went through the whole thing of what could happen if you got such a letter. And then after the reading, this was in Portland, and someone came up to me and they leaned over the table, very earnest, and he said to me, "How could you throw an ice cream cone into the mailbox?" And I realized then and there, this is it. People will think your poems.
They think that you're just telling them what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That there's no imagination involved or making things up.
Right.
But that's, of course, a big part of writing a poem. In a poem, the events don't need to be true, but the emotions do.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think people think that because poetry feels more vulnerable than when you're like listening to a song or watching a movie, like you were saying, you don't automatically assume that everything is 100% true?
Absolutely. If the poem does its job, it will connect with you emotionally. You'll feel the poem. And because of that, you'll think you have a super close connection with the poet. A lot of poets, you've heard, you didn't fall in love with me, you fell in love with my poetry. They're different. But absolutely what you're saying is true, that you feel vulnerable when you're reading it because it hits the vulnerability in you. So you think that this must be something that the poet is confiding or they're, and that's good. The poet has done their job. But again, as I always say, I want you to feel something you feel. Don't feel what you think I'm feeling. I don't even want to be around the poem when you're reading it. It's your poem at that point.
So, are there any current reads or maybe favorite reads of poetry books that you would recommend for people that are interested or maybe are just starting to get into reading poetry?
So there's so much poetry, and I do have all these books strewn about near my bed and all. Well, there's one of my favorite poets is Kim Addonizio, who has a new book out, fairly new book. And she's full of surprises, and there's a lot of limerence in her poems too. I mean, I don't know if she would agree with me, but there's longing and love and obsession, but they're also beautifully constructed. Diane Prima is a poet I would welcome, particularly women. She's one of the early beat poets, but we didn't hear too much about her because she was the only woman. But she actually moved from New York to San Francisco in the 50s with a baby. She was a single mother. She has a lot of sort of manifestos about poetry and what poetry means to her and being a woman poet. But she's a great poet. I would recommend any of Thomas Lux's books, Lux. Dorianne Lux, which sounds like Lux, but it's spelled Laux. She's one of my favorite poets. There's so much poetry. Yeah. Frank O'Hara, that's someone I would recommend to anyone. He's from the New York School of Poetry, and he's someone I grew up loving. And he'll write about just taking a walk on the street. He has a book called Lunch Poems, and it's a little book you can actually fit in your back pocket. And he was the curator at the Museum of Modern Art for his day job, but he would write a poem every day at lunch on 57th Street. And they're my kinds of poems. They're fun, but there's a poem underneath the poem. He's great. He died way too young. He was 40 years old, a terrible accident. But Frank O'Hara,
Thank you so much for coming in. It's been lovely to have you here.
Thank you. This was
And
fun.
We look forward to your next collection, if you have the energy for it.
Thank you so much for being so interested and caring about poetry. It's beautiful. Thank you.
For coming.
If you'd like more information from us, check out the show notes or send us an email at podcast@villagewell.com. You can always order the books mentioned through our website. This episode of the Village Well podcast is brought to you by Village Well Books and Coffee. It was produced and edited by Josh Stretton Carlson, and our theme music is from Noah Vickland. See you next week, and keep reading.